Inanimate Insanity is one of the biggest object shows in object show history, being now only by BFDI, renowned for its bizarre humor, soul-crushing angst, insane plot twists that was in the works for possibly as long as 10 years, and inability to write a healthy relationship. There are very few relationships present within II which I could say that I find annoying, uninteresting, or poorly written. With such a diverse and thoroughly traumatized cast, you're bound to find at least one pairing that's so brutally messed up in a way that you fuck with heavily that you can attach yourself to. II covers a vast range of usually unhealthy relationships, ranging from kinda rocky, but they can manage to work through their issues most of the time, to CHARACTER! Get the fuck out of there! They're going to kill you! Character, do you hear me? They're evil! Leave now! Get away, character! And then there's whatever the hell the Harmless Alliance was. With your help, we can kill Nickel Inanimate Insanity. Among this great radioactive variety of toxic relationships, there is one specific kind that Animation Epic just can't get enough of, and that is...
Codependent!
Codependence!
Dependency, whether it be one-sided or co-dependent, is a theme heavily woven throughout the show. I can guarantee you that every character in this me-forsaken show has displayed at least one moment of dependence. You'd think that kind of over-dependence on dependence, take a shot every time I use a variation of that word, would get kinda stale after a while, but actually it doesn't. As someone who very likely has DPD, I have a huge appreciation for how diverse Animation Epic's portrayal of dependency is in Inanimate Insanity, and how they handle the topic as a whole. It's not perfect, rarely anything is, but it's pretty damn close to it, especially the dependence present in one particular character I am particularly obsessed with, but we'll get to that later. Today, I will be going through 3 of my favorite examples of dependent characters and or relationships within the show. Starting with the most obvious choice... When you saw the title, the first thing you probably thought of was these two. Salt and Pepper, they're BCFFs to each other, girlfriends to MePhone 4S, and the most flagrantly obvious and in-your-face codependent relationship in the show, to me. Now, I'm not really a fan of either of the two, but dependency is so heavily intertwined in their arcs and development to the point where you physically cannot talk about one without talking about the other, that I would be a fool not to include them in this video. So here's Baby's first analytical deep dive into characters I don't care that much about. There's very little that can separate Salt and Pepper in Season 1. One is rarely on screen without the other. It isn't really until after Pepper's elimination where we see the two be apart, and Salt be her own individual self, and neither of them really had a choice in that. The two are the focal points of each other's existences. They seem to actively avoid interacting with anyone that isn't their other half. There's a pretty limited amount of examples where either of the two talk to anyone outside of each other, at least before Pepper's elimination, and even then, they're more focused on their bestie than the person they are actively talking to. Like, at the beginning of a Lemony lesson, Salt is reciting a conversation she had with Pepper to OJ, and she's clearly only talking to him because she has no idea where Pepper is, seeing as she tells OJ how much she misses her, and how she pushes past him and rushes to her side the moment she shows up again. A pretty significant part of this interaction is that, when Salt was telling OJ how much she missed Pepper, she told him how much time they had been apart, down to the very second. Imagine being so obsessed with your friend that you start a timer in your head every time you get separated. So sweet, but also so not normal. Neither of the two have friends outside of each other. Salt has Pepper, and Pepper has Salt. There's no one else out there for them in their lives, and they chose for it to be that way. Salt is the first of the two to actually try to hang out with someone that isn't Pepper, which goes against the rules of being a BCFF, as Pepper reveals here.
No, you are betraying us. So you're saying I can't have any other friends or find love? Exactly. That's what being BCFFs is all about.
Well, This is one of the first looks we get into the more toxic side of Salt and Pepper's friendship, something that is directly caused by Pepper's elimination. After Pepper gets eliminated, we start to see some of the cracks in Salt and Pepper's friendship. The elimination caused a sort of domino effect that led to the two becoming a lot less close to each other than they once were, all because Pepper's absence pushed Salt into talking to other people. Other people being OJ. Now, I'm not diagnosing anyone, yet, but there's a common trait within people with DPD where they'll quickly try to fill the void an old partner, friend, or whatever leaves when leaving them. Or, to put it more DSM-5ly, a person with DPD urgently seeks another relationship as a source of care and support when a close relationship ends. This is exactly what Salt does when Pepper is eliminated. Salt has no interest in talking with other people, but the second Pepper flies off to Idiotic Island, OJ has her unwillingly wrapped around his finger. Salt's relationship with OJ is complicated, and also kind of gross. Nowhere near as gross as a relationship it seems to be based on. I could write essay upon essay on why Kodera was fucked up, but I don't want to touch Total Drama World Tour with a 50-foot pole. But still, not great. It's weird where it starts, the snowdown, and is weird where it continues. But I think her relationship with Pepper can kind of explain why her relationship with OJ ended up like that. With how freakishly obsessive we've seen Salt and Pepper be, we can gather that that's kind of just how they're programmed to be. They probably would have formed this kind of attachment to anyone. The problem here is that that's something that is unique to them. There's only 2 other characters that have this obsessive trait, one of them being a prototype of them that we don't see until way later, and the other develops it later on, completely independent to their coding. Of course OJ was going to be weirded out by her affection, especially considering how suddenly it developed, and the fact that it was romantic. He tries to push her away, which only ends up with her clinging harder, getting more and more parasocial with him. Salt is used to having someone that is constantly paying attention and obsessing over her, the same way she does to that person. That person isn't currently available to do that, so she finds a replacement that she likes. The replacement isn't willing to do the paying attention and obsessing that person did for her, which is confusing and distressing, so she keeps pushing and trying to build that relationship up until she gets what she was missing, which weirds out the replacement even further, and the cycle continues. Now that you see the obsession from this perspective, it becomes fascinating. Her codependency with Pepper has ruined how Salt navigates relationships. She is so used to this level of attention that she expects it from every other person she interacts with, and when she doesn't receive that level of attention, she becomes desperate and parasocial, to the point where this desperation to gain OJ's attention and romantic affection pushes her away from Pepper. In Season 2, we see the attention-seeking in the relationship become a lot more one-sided. Salt still kind of feeds off of Pepper's attention, and in alternate reality show, the attention of the viewers, I guess. But she's much further down on her priorities, while Pepper, who stuck to the one-friend BCFF rule, desperately clings onto her friendship with Salt, both physically and metaphorically. She can't let go of her. She is, as the show puts it, latching on.
And you, just kinda latch on.
Salt! I'm latching on!
Latching on is, I think, a really good way to put Pepper's position in their shifting relationship. The 2 used to be glued to each other's sides, but now they're becoming unstuck, and Pepper is desperately trying to stick herself back onto Salt, to her annoyance. Yes, annoyance. Salt now has an issue with all the attention she's getting, which Pepper also has an issue with. While, yes, Pepper is hanging on to their failing friendship for dear life, she also seems to be building up a resentment towards Salt. Salt's shift in attention has changed the roles they once had within their friendship. She, who was once an equal to Salt, was now more of an accessory. Notice how Salt always gets put in front of Pepper. Pepper is an afterthought. She's seen as Salt's sidekick, something that was bound to happen, seeing as their roles are trendsetter and trend follower. Something she is aware and very insecure of. Lightbulb and Test Tube take advantage of this in Alternate Reality Show, an episode that isn't given enough credit for how it develops certain contestant relationships, which leads to a nasty beatdown. Alright, yeah, this is a version of Pepper from an alternate universe, I mean, it's in the episode's name. But I don't doubt any of these feelings she has against Salt are invalid, especially now that we have Season 4 to go off of. Pepper's more negative feelings she has in regards to Salt are a lot more obvious in Season 4, and based off of what we've seen, are probably going to have some sort of payoff. It's hammered into us that Pepper doesn't have much to her outside of her friendship with Salt, and based on interactions she's had with Magnet, her narrative foil? In this moment from the elimination ceremony and Cobb mentality,
Peps, look who you're up against. No need to spin that stupid thing. Plus, if I'm wrong, the sooner this silly game is over, the better. We have a lot of hospital training to perfect. For sure.
Well,
she doesn't seem to be a big fan of this. Her competing in Season 4 is a way to separate herself from Salt and become her own person. Break out of that whole codependency thing, you know? Her and Salt's dynamic in Season 4 seems to have swapped here, actually. Notice how Pepper looks irritated when Salt talks to her about the working with her at the hospital? Compare that to Pepper latching on to Salt in the hotel in the movie. We've gone from Salt being annoyed by Pepper's attention to Pepper being annoyed by Salt's attention. But why would she be annoyed by this? Didn't she want Salt's attention? I think I have an answer for that. First of all, there's that aforementioned perception people have of Pepper. There's nothing to her except for her friendship with Salt. But I also think there's a little hypocrisy or something from Salt. Salt is obsessed with getting OJ's attention, right? She wants him to date her. But OJ is dating Paper and is clearly not interested in being in a throuple, especially not with her. This concept probably had to be explained to her in detail by Pepper after their moment in the season 2 finale. I doubt her feelings for OJ are fully gone, but I feel like she's at least accepted that whatever she wants with him isn't gonna happen. So her attention gradually shifts away from OJ and right back to Pepper. After all this time, all her attempts to keep Salt engaged, she comes back, not even thanks to Pepper's own efforts, and acts like nothing ever happened between them, and that would be pretty hurtful. As if Pepper didn't feel enough like a sidekick, Salt only comes back to her just because her man is taken, and as if Pepper was some sort of backup plan. I personally would just be glad she wants to talk to me again, but I can imagine anyone without a personality disorder would be pretty damn upset about this, and rightfully so. I can only hope Salt will apologize for undermining Pepper for so long, and that Pepper makes her own friends. But also becomes a lot more self-aware of how her clinginess can affect people who are actively trying to branch out and become more independent from a certain person because of Magnet. Magnet is what the fandom assumes to be the Pepper to Pepper Salt, or as I called her before, Pepper's narrative foil. While I would love to talk about her in detail, she has less than half an hour of screen time to go off of, so there'd be a lot of I think and I hope and lots of speculation. I'm excited to see what they do with her, and of course, what they do with Pepper and Salt, and what the next step of their relationship's messy evolution will be. So, how's that? Again, it's my first time analyzing Salt and Pepper as both a duo and individuals, so my apologies if it didn't come out right. The next group of characters is one I have much more experience talking about, and that you probably didn't expect to see in this video.
Really? Was?
Fair enough.
Ah, FanTube. The most discussed and most divisive relationship to ever bless this fandom. The relationship status has been a huge point of contention within the fandom for quite a while, and it's been getting much worse since Season 4 started. Are they a couple? Are they friends? Are they queer platonic partners? Are they... siblings? Nobody knows! Throwing Bot into the argument just makes things more complicated. Some believe that the Fan, Test Tube, and Bot trio is one wholesome, if not slightly dysfunctional, nuclear family, while others believe that that's a horribly amatonormative way to view things, and that two people can raise a child while still being a strictly platonic relationship. The discourse has gotten so severe and really annoying that the topic was banned from OSC Confessions altogether, a decision that was definitely for the best, because I'm kinda scared that in releasing this video, the discourse is just gonna get worse. While no one can agree on what kind of relationship they're in, the general consensus is that it's a positive one. But I have to disagree. Expressing and hell, even forming my own opinions is really hard for me. That's kinda a given for someone with a very high chance of having DPD. I am very easily swayed or convinced. I've adopted many beliefs from others and abandoned many of my own, some in a subconscious way and others as a way of protection, but despite how passionate people are about this subject and despite how scary that is, I can't bring myself to believe that these two are good for each other. They're happy together, or at least they seem to be. They very obviously love each other very much, but as someone who has experience with these sorts of relationships, they aren't healthy. And the cause of this unhealthiness is the exact same thing as what is making me scared to release something like this about them to the public. Dependence! Yay! Personal bullshit aside, let's get into the ugly bits of Fan and Test Tube's relationships, and their horrible codependence. It's made pretty clear right from the start that Fan and Test Tube aren't the most socially gifted people out there. They're both awkward, nerdy, and kinda reclusive, though not entirely in the same way. Their shared social incompetence ends up being what brings them together in the first place, a decision that ends up being not great for either of them. While, yes, their friendship did benefit them in many ways, their respective developments and arcs are tied closely together, and they've both made some realizations and come out of their shells because of each other. It also ended up doing some damage to things like perception of other people, relationships, and the value they have in those relationships. Especially for Test Tube. Here's another statement that might not go over very well. I am actually shaking while writing this, even more so than when I wrote the first draft, which I am willing to share if anyone asks for it. Fan is a very, very flawed individual, and it's him that turns the sweet friendship between two awkward but well-meaning outcasts into something sour. Fan's negative influence on Test Tube cannot be understated. His selfish behavior and overwhelming dependence on her and her approval caused severe damage to Test Tube's ability to form positive connections and how she perceived other people and their intentions. Test Tube was, for the longest time, the more approachable and more social out of the two objects. Again, she wasn't exactly socially gifted, but she still had her fair share of friendly interactions, quite a few being initiated by her. We see her form multiple connections over the course of the show, but Fan always seems to get in the way of them, even if those connections were between her and people he seemed to get along with. An early example of this is her friendship with Lightbulb, which formed an alternate reality show and seemed to be going really well for her, as shown in Mind Your Own Business and Hatching the Plan. They clearly had something great going on between them, and yet we haven't seen them interact much outside of Test Tube reapplying Lightbulb's Blu-ray, and that feels really strange to me. Maybe they've had more one-to-one time off screen, but if that were true, why wouldn't we see any of that reflected within the show? If they were still actively hanging out with each other, they would have had at least one interaction or exchange outside of the Blu-ray application thing, but they haven't, not yet at least. And I believe Fan has something to do with this. From the very start of her relationship with Test Tube, Fan appears to be jealous of Lightbulb. It's not very in your face, but his little "that's fine by me" to Suitcase isn't really convincing. Just a quick sidebar, because I didn't catch this in my first draft. Fan ends up partnering with Suitcase for the challenge, something that seems to surprise and even kind of worry Test Tube, though she brushes it off quickly. It's not a huge moment, but I think it says something about both of them. Fan doesn't like it when Test Tube hangs out with other people, but doesn't see a problem in himself hanging out with other people, a major double standard. Test Tube's reaction to this shows that this specific act of hypocrisy is unusual for him, to the point where it causes her momentary fear. Why does him not pestering her to pair up with him despite her already being with Lightbulb worry her? Much to think about. Anyways, you could chalk this up to Fan's anxiety regarding change, and that definitely is a factor in his behavior. Fan's fear of change and weird sense of identity gets a lot of focus in this episode, but I don't think it's the only factor at play. Fan clearly has an issue of not being the sole object, of Test Tube's attention, and while we don't see it happen on screen, I have reason to believe he has gotten between her and Lightbulb based on this moment in The Future Is Today.
Golly, that shimmer energy sure does the trick.
Without drama, they said.
Notice how Test Tube scowls the moment Fan enters the lab while she's applying Lightbulb's Blu-ray? This may be a stretch, but considering how possessive he is of people / the things he's close with, to the point where he shows them off / emphasizes that they are his, almost as if he believes he owns them and that no one else can have them, it doesn't feel too unreasonable to believe that maybe Test Tube is annoyed about him intruding on one of the only times she can be alone with a friend that isn't Fan. Then there's also the fact that he has actually ruined a friendship of Test Tube's before it could even form before. Enter Cabby. Upon seeing her for the first time, Test Tube immediately expresses an interest in Cabby. She clearly admires her and her supposedly incredibly detailed research, but Fan's suspicions towards her, which are another example of Fan's hypocrisy / double standards for other people, because he logs every detail about his fellow contestants and then posts it publicly, turn Cabby from a potential friend into a rival. The beef Test Tube has with Cabby is intense, and intensely one-sided, and it all started because Fan chose to stick his nose in someone else's business and then involve Test Tube in his confrontation. He never directly tells Test Tube not to trust her, but the way he talks about her when showing Test Tube the file he stole in the shame of the name had a huge effect on her opinion of Cabby. The fact that even the briefest expression of mistrust from Fan was enough to taint Test Tube's view of her tells us a lot about both how simultaneously trusting and untrusting Test Tube is, and how easily she can be influenced by Fan. I often see the fandom portray Test Tube as the dominant one in their relationship, but it's actually Fan that has the control. Obviously, there's the whole preventing Test Tube from forming proper friendships things I just talked about, but there's a lot more things in the show that show exactly how much of Test Tube's actions are determined by or done for Fan. Season 4 has already done a great job at showing us how fan-motivated Test Tube is. Almost everything she has done in the season so far has been has been for Fan. She backs up everything Fan has to say about bringing back the game, supporting the game's revival despite it very obviously being a terrible idea in every conceivable way, insisting that it should continue despite the fact the first elimination almost caused her death, a thing which is no longer reversible for the contestants, by the way, which even Fan had some doubts about. She was nowhere near as passionate about Inanimate Insanity as Fan was, and yet she let it continue, even after all the danger, near-death experiences, and many potential existing risks which she is very much aware of, even after multiple people, most notably OJ, expressed their concerns about the game's continuation, and that maybe they shouldn't go through with it, especially after Fan's little encounter with Zeus. Speaking of, TestTube doesn't even consider allowing the game to be paused, not cancelled, paused, all because of something Fan wrote in his game Bible, and most likely wouldn't have stepped down from hosting for the episode, or co-hosting really, if OJ hadn't told her to take a break. She doesn't argue or shoot down any of Fan's decisions or random rule changes, even if they don't make sense or are just bad ideas, despite clearly having the capacity to be able to tell that they're bad ideas. She knows better, and yet she goes along with whatever Fan says anyways, because he's her friend. He can steer her wrong. It's not like Fan is notoriously impulsive and irrational or anything. Fan was always so passionate about Inanimate Insanity. If anyone can make the right judgment on what to do with the game, it should be him. Who is she to get in the way of his interests, or in the way of his impulsive climb up Metag's wall thing, despite the very high risk of injury, which does end up happening. She doesn't try to stop him, she doesn't try to hold him back, she just lets him push past her to save their child, whose whole existence is one of the most significant examples of TestTube mindlessly following Fan. TestTube did not know Bo, nor did she really care about her to any degree. And yet, despite this, she still agreed to help Fan create a robot replica of this dead girl, which, by the way, he didn't actually know either, all because she was his favorite character. And making Bot wouldn't have been an easy task for her, either. The level of work between her and Fan would have been very uneven, considering Fan had no knowledge in mechanics or robotics. Realistically speaking, the only input Fan would have had on this project would have been providing TestTube with all the information to program Bot with. She would have been the only one doing all the heavy lifting, and there wasn't really anything in it for her. This isn't to say Bot would have been some sort of miserable time for her. TestTube loves doing this kind of thing as the resident scientist/inventor, and she was doing it for Fan, and Fan's joy brings her joy. And even in the end, when Bot grew into something much greater than what they were programmed to be, TestTube gained a new friend, one with a bond she couldn't possibly recreate with anyone else. But there's still the fact that she spent so much energy building and programming something based on someone she didn't know or care about, which also has a lot of morally dubious implications, which I can't really get into but should be obvious. And then dealing with the identity crisis and other mental issues this creation ends up going through. And then having to look after it without the assistance of the person whose idea it was to create them in the first place. Oh, and just to throw this out there, TestTube stayed on Indefinite Island so that she could be close to Bot and be by their side if they were to ever be eliminated. Fan didn't do this. Fan went straight back to the hotel. Just pushed all responsibility onto TestTube. TestTube doesn't do anything for herself. Most of her actions and decisions are in some way tied to Fan. That's her big dependent trait in her half of the codependent relationship. She goes along with whatever Fan says because she needs him. She needs his company. She needs his friendship. The two have built up a kind of relationship where neither of them can function without the other. TestTube needs Fan's presence because, well, he's her closest friend. Losing him would be detrimental to her social life because he's one of the only things she has. So she does what he would want, what he would approve of, just so the friendship can keep going, just so she can have his approval. And this pushoveriness, this need to do whatever he says, is comforting to Fan. It feels good to be needed, to know that someone wants to be around him. Her willingness to do whatever he says is a bit of a crutch for him, a way to assure him that his actions and judgments are justified and correct. And, you know, he really values her too. He needs her just as much as she needs him. This is their weird cycle of approval. What TestTube does gives approval to not only her, but also to Fan, because her backing him up in things shows it. She approves of these things, and Fan approves of her approving of these things, and this is becoming really difficult to put in a way that makes sense. To put a long story short, Fan and Test Tube are both extremely emotionally unstable people that rely, or depend, on each other to feel worthy, to have some sense of belonging or whatever, to feel the pleasure of having someone else's approval, and it is extremely damaging to both of them. These two are in major need of therapy, and of friends that aren't each other. Test Tube actually is the perfect opportunity to form some new bonds, seeing as Fan is currently out of commission. I really hope she spends the next few episodes reflecting and reevaluating her friendship with Fan, because it is, not great. First thing the two should do when Fan gets out of the hospital is have a serious conversation about their unhealthy codependency. And also go to therapy. Most II characters would benefit from intensive therapy, but the FanTube situation is dire. Like, they are seriously fucked up. They need to get some professional help before their egos are ruined forever. There's one more little detail I want to mention that wasn't in my original script. I haven't seen anyone point this out about the new Animation Epic profile picture, but Fan takes up a much larger portion of the profile picture than Test Tube does. The way his arm was positioned kind of made it look like he was pushing her to me, although after getting a closer look at the picture, he very clearly isn't. But he is taking up most of the frame. Almost his entire body is visible. Well, you can't even see all of Test Tube's mouth because of where the picture cuts off. Again, it really goes to show which of the two is more important. But that's less of a dependence thing and more of a fan selfishness thing, so not really related. Just wanted to bring it up. Well, that ended up being a lot more intensely opinionated than I originally intended it to. I think this segment alone invalidates every time I've ever said and ever will say that I'm not an individual and all my opinions belong to someone else. Heartwarming! Girls' dependence is cured by writing video about dependence. Also, just in case it was unclear with how I wrote it, I do not believe that Fan is some irredeemable piece of shit abuser who deserves to die. He is a complex and heavily flawed person, but he isn't evil or anything, and Test Tube is not his victim. Please don't get the wrong idea because this video heavily highlights his flaws. I like Fan. It's just hard to talk about his dependence and the codependent relationship he got himself and Test Tube stuck in without making him seem at least a little bit morally dark gray. Now that I've gotten these two iconic relationships out of the way, I can move on to the most dependent character to ever dependent, the character I've been thinking about nonstop for 2 months straight. The character that inspired me to make this video in the first place.
Look, Marshmallow, I drew us!
Apple has always been a favorite of mine. There was something about her that just made me really connect to her on a deeper level, but I wasn't quite sure what it was until I started getting into the whole deep character analysis thing. Once I realized the intricacies of her character, I became completely obsessed. There really isn't enough appreciation for Apple and how tragic of a character she is out there. Not a lot of people really pay attention to her, or they'll just water her down to another part of a polycule, which really sucks to me because there is so much to her that people don't notice. So this segment is also my way of getting more people to notice her and how fascinating of a character she can be if you just look into her a little more closely. When looking for examples of dependency in II, Apple really sticks out amongst the rest of the cast. While the other characters all have their own issues, experiences, and traits unique to them, they still don't stand out as much as Apple's do. Because at the end of the day, no matter how badly their dependence behaviors affect them, their traits are just that, traits. The rest of the cast have so much more to their personalities than whatever traits they show. Meanwhile, Apple's traits are her personality. Those little traits aren't just little traits for Apple. They're symptoms of something much greater. We all know about what happened to Paper, right? He buggered off with Knife to watch a show, which led to his team losing the challenge. He tied for votes with Knife and had to do a tiebreaker with him, which he lost. He got sent away to Idiotic Island, where he was trapped in a cage for months and became yet another failed representation of DID. People obsess over him and his trauma, but our good friend Paper isn't the only contestant to have sustained permanent mental damage from their stint on Idiotic Island. By the time Apple made it to Idiotic Island, everyone else had already escaped and been sent to a new and improved version of it. Not a single one of these eliminated contestants had any idea that Apple was trapped on the island that they had just escaped from, and it seemed to slip me Phone 4's mind too, because Apple was left on that island to rot in isolation for months. Isolation can be really damaging for the human brain, something that seems to apply to objects in the Object Show universe as well, because Apple returns to Inanimate Island a completely different person. Have you ever noticed how different Apple is is now compared to how she was in season 1, because her personality got a total overhaul, a fact that is really important in diagnosing her with DPD. Yes, you heard me. The one big thing that distinguishes Apple's dependency issues from everyone else's is the fact that they stem from an undiagnosed personality disorder. It might not seem obvious at first, but if you pay close attention to her character with the context of her having DPD in mind, it becomes really obvious. Almost every single part of her character from season 2 onwards can be linked with DPD. But before I get into all of that, I really want to talk about her personality shift, because it is unlike anything I've seen in an object show before, and like I said, it's really important for her whole DPD thing. Apple is somewhat of a childlike character. She's got this childlike whimsy and curiosity about her, and a lot of her interests and hobbies can be seen as childish. While she certainly wasn't whimsical in season 1, she was still very much childlike, just in a more bratty way, for lack of a better word. A lot of people have talked about how harsh and bossy Lightbulb could be in season 1, yet I have never heard anyone talk about how downright vicious Apple could be. Yes, she was still an innocent airhead, but she was also capable of being mean or rude to others, including her own friends, out of nowhere, and had the habit of lashing out and holding grudges against people for petty reasons. The Snowdown showcases her nastier side pretty well, and is also the beginning of a relationship that'll become very important for her later on. The very first thing she says in this episode shows us exactly what kind of kid she is, or would have been if she had had a childhood.
Speaking of joy, when am I gonna get my pony?
Not only is that one of the most stereotypical little girl dream gift things she could possibly ask for, but the way she asks for it shows an unpleasantly childish level of impatience and demanding. Through this line, we find out that Apple believes in Santa, which is a childish thing in itself, and she's willing to kill people over it. Seriously, she's so upset about the discovery that Santa Claus isn't real that she pushes Marshmallow into the campfire the great Team Epic trio are all sitting around, and she wasn't even the one to break it to her. Apple gets a lot of mileage from this discovery, all her less than 2 minutes of screen time being focused around her dealing with the fact that he doesn't exist. Her whininess is front and center in this episode, with her grudginess being set up for episodes to come, because this Christmas conflict causes her view on Marsh to drop drastically. She keeps this grudge all the way up to Marsh on Mars, which takes place over a year after the Snowdown. Another unfortunate trait she has in season 1 is that she seems to gain pleasure from people, especially people she holds grudges against, being hurt or upset, as seen through her relentless harassment and arguing with Marsh, which, again, started because Paintbrush told her Santa wasn't real, and her tormenting Paper by repeatedly triggering his DID in Inanimate Smackdown. I mean, the first one was probably unintentional, but OJ telling her off certainly wasn't going to stop her from repeating it until she knocked him unconscious. Apple, sweetie, I love you, but I can't defend you for that. It feels wrong to say she deserved to be eliminated, though. Maybe if the punishment wasn't being sent to the island that makes you mentally ill, then it wouldn't. Point is, season 1 Apple sucked. She acted like a bratty, immature toddler throughout the whole season, which is a far cry from the girl she becomes later on. The shift from her unpleasant brattiness present in her season 1 self and her significantly friendlier, more well-meaning attitude she possesses in season 2 and beyond is honestly kind of jarring. And despite it making her a significantly more pleasant person to be around, it's sad that her shift in personality was a sudden and drastic change caused by her brain rewiring itself because of a traumatic experience and not a natural progression of her character. You might be thinking, well, it sucks that it had to happen that way, but she still changed for the better. What's the use in being upset or feeling bad about it? To which I have to say, she developed a personality disorder. No matter how much nicer she seems to be, this isn't a change for the better, especially not for her. And now that we've gone over her personality shift and established why that change from pushy to pushover is important for her dependence, I can explain why that is through her relationship with Marshmallow. I can't talk about the negative impact of this big change and all her dependent traits without talking about her relationship with Marsh, and that's because almost all her screen time involves her in some way. Usually this sort of thing is detrimental to analyzing a character, but in Apple's case, it's actually really helpful because not only does Marshmallow bring out the worst of her traits, but the fact she shares most of her screen time with Marshmallow is another detail that strengthens the idea that Apple has DPD. Marshmallow has a very special connection with Apple, one that no other character can say that they have with any of their friends. The way Apple acts around Marsh, and the way her life is centered around her, sets a relationship apart from the rest. These two have a much more complex and layered relationship than any other set of friends in the show, and that's because their relationship resembles that of a person with DPD's relationship with their DP rather than any regular friendship. For those who don't know, a DP is a person that a person with DPD is particularly dependent on, as the name suggests. It's kind of like the DPD equivalent of an FP. You can have multiple of these to my knowledge, but Apple's only got the one, as far as we know. How someone decides on their DPs and what makes someone a DP depends, on the person. In Apple's case, Marsh was pretty much the only person she had any meaningful connection with, so when they made up, she clung to her, and she clung to her hard. The unhealthy attachment was instantaneous and severe. As I said before, Apple shares almost all of her time on screen with Marshmallow, and anytime she isn't by her side, she's just trying to get back. Apple displays an intense desperation to keep Marshmallow around her. She's constantly clinging on to her, or doing or saying anything she can to stop her from leaving, something that inadvertently pushes Marsh away. There are some pretty obvious examples of this desperation to be with Marsh, like the time she runs around the whole island while Marsh is hiding from her so that they can finish their finger painting sessions. But there are other less extreme examples that I find much more important, most of which take place while Marsh is still where Apple wants her to be. In a complete flip of her past argumentative self, Apple tries to keep Marsh around by being more agreeable. Apple holds Marsh to a much greater level of importance than she does anyone else, or than Marsh does to her. This grander view of her leads Apple to seeing Marsh's thoughts and opinions as much more important, or just more right, than her own. So she changes her stance on things to align with her values and gain her approval. What Marsh believes, Apple believes too. Let's look at a kick in the right direction. At the beginning of the episode, we see Apple and Marshmallow drawing together, half related, but the drawing Apple does is of her and Marshmallow together, and I think it's implied that Apple has been constantly starting over with the same drawing, trying to make it perfect for her? When Apple grabs Marshmallow's rather dark drawing of Bo, the two have a little back and forth about her. Marsh expresses guilt towards Bo's death, finding the circumstances and the fact she can't come back to life unfair, which Apple doesn't seem to agree with, saying that
Bo's a disgusting and annoying menace.
she clearly feels really strongly about this, what with the phrasing and the pronunciation of her statement, and yet, despite this, she immediately changes her stance the second Marsh tells her she thought Bo was nice. And look at the way she expresses this fixed opinion.
Oh, totally. She was awesome. Amazing.
She is very audibly panicked. The way she stammers with the uhs and the ums at the start, trying to think of what to say. The fact the first word she manages to choke out is an expression of strong agreement. The speed she talks at. And the way she uses overwhelmingly positive adjectives to describe Bo, very clearly overcompensating for the harsh words she used against Bo not even a minute prior. This is her doing damage control. She's trying to get Marsh back on her side, reverse any sort of damage she may have done to their friendship in insulting Bo. Now, this fear of Apple's is completely irrational. Like, realistically, this minor disagreement wouldn't have had any major effect on the relationship. But that doesn't make the fear any less real for her. I feel like Marsh storming off immediately after this, despite not being related to their disagreement, may have made it a little worse, actually. Being left without Marsh is clearly very distressing for Apple. Just look at how upset she looks when Marsh starts walking away. The way she extends her arm. It's the small details like these that crush my heart into a fine powder and make it fly away in the wind. Like how she ignores Lightbulb during the challenge and passes to Marsh. Ignoring someone else's demand just to further serve her DP? It's excellent. Alongside following her beliefs, Apple also follows Marshmallow's actions. Our best canon example of this, theory foreshadowing, comes to us in Everything's AOJ. Thanks to some quick thinking on Paintbrush's behalf, Apple gets the opportunity to participate in the challenge, or what they think is the challenge, when she really should be eliminated. And yet, despite having this chance that she shouldn't have, she still chooses not to take part, purely because Marshmallow didn't want to take part. And man, I really felt that. I've backed out of plenty of activities just because my friends either couldn't or simply didn't want to. I won't do anything my friends won't do, and Apple won't do anything Marshmallow won't do. The opposite applies too. Would Apple have moved into the mansion if Marshmallow hadn't come back for her? Probably not! Every decision she makes, every opinion she forms, it all hinges on Marsh. So the way she freaks out when Marsh isn't around makes total sense. Like I said before, being separated from Marsh is really distressing for Apple, and whenever they're apart, Apple becomes desperate to get them back together. Nothing makes this trait of hers clearer than let her rip. Apple is at her absolute clingiest in this episode, both in a physical and metaphorical sense. Her earlier interactions with Marsh in this episode include her manically running around in search of her and practically suffocating her in hugs. She's also at her most paranoid. The level of anxiety and paranoia she displays in this episode is insanely concerning. She is genuinely terrified at even the idea of letting Marsh go, because what if something happens to her? This should just be another one of those irrational fears regarding separation and abandonment that comes with DPD, but they actually end up being verified when a falling spiky rock gives Marshmallow a golden opportunity to escape and get that alone time she's been longing for. Apple and Marshmallow have opposing needs. Apple needs to spend time with Marshmallow, while Marshmallow needs to spend some time alone. The difference here is that Marshmallow can cope with her needs not being met. We see it in the show. She really wants that space, but not being able to get that space is just an inconvenience for her. It's annoying as hell, but we know she can deal with it. The same can't be said about Apple. She is physically incapable of being alone. I mean, just look at her. She freaks out the moment she loses sight of Marshmallow. She runs around the mansion frantically, calling out her name and screaming in panic. They've only been apart for a few seconds and she's already stressed beyond belief. So imagine how she must have felt when they reunited. While the two are apart, Marshmallow runs into Bo. She ends up spilling about her personal problems, which Bo uses to her advantage in trying to get Marshmallow all to herself, tearing her and Apple apart for good. To Marsh, her hatred towards Apple is completely justified. She was just using her for votes. She has the right to be upset. But to Apple, this shift in behavior would make absolutely no sense. Not a single word Marsh heard her say was her own. We don't know what Apple thinks caused Marsh's sudden hostility towards her, but I don't doubt there was any self-blame or self-hatred involved. Classic DPD inferiority complex. So, that's it. Their relationship is over. Apple is miserable now because Marsh doesn't want to talk to her, right? Well, actually, no. Marshmallow makes it very clear that she doesn't want to be around Apple anymore. Apple is very much aware of this. She's perfectly capable of taking the hint, and yet she still continues to follow her around. When Apple backs out of the challenge and everything's AOJ, Marsh lashes out on her. She responds to an innocent action on Apple's behalf with a verbal beatdown. It's confusing and honestly kind of scary. She tries to reason with Marsh, only to get cut off and have a mop thrown at her head. This is a completely unreasonable reaction looking at it from Apple's perspective, and I think she knows that it is, but she doesn't stop following her. She chases her and keeps on cleaning, not making an effort to stop Marsh from physically attacking her with another mop. She gives her a half hug and tells her she thought that they were friends, implying she still saw her that way, despite everything she had done to her in that episode. Again, Apple is aware Marshmallow wants nothing to do with her. She's aware that her actions here aren't justifiable, and she's aware that what she's doing to her is hurting her. You can see it in her face when she's backing away from Marsh in fear. So why doesn't she actually back off? Well, because it's Marshmallow. She can't just leave Marshmallow. She's her best friend, her only friend. She can't live without her. This all links to a rather unfortunate DPD trait. People with DPD are much more likely to tolerate being in toxic or abusive relationships for a mishmash of reason, ranging from helplessness / not being able to look after themselves, inferiority, fear of loneliness, pushoveriness, and just not being able to detach themselves from the people they're attached to, and we know how attached Apple is to Marsh. I'm not saying Marsh is an abuser or anything, but if she was, if this violence she displayed continued after this episode, Apple's behavior in Everything's AOJ shows us that that wouldn't change anything. That she would continue to put up with this behavior, because anything's better than being alone. But that's all hypothetical. Again, Marshmallow isn't an abuser, and the whole Marshbopal plot in Season 2 is a morally complicated mess that they've all forgiven each other for anyways.
It's water under the bridge, fan. Come on.
So, that's all we have for Apple, right? After the Marshbopal plot ends, she doesn't really get any constructive screen time to go off of to keep the segment going, so we should finish off here. Round off the points made and try to lighten the mood a little bit because this segment got a little bleak, and write a nice conclusion where I talk about how much I love Apple, how well written she is, and how tragic of a character she actually is, and then move on to writing a conclusion for the video as a whole. That would be the normal thing to do. But I'm not normal! You're not getting any conclusions today, not for this segment and not for this video. And that's not just because the bleak ending wore me down and my medication is wearing off, which makes my language and phrasing skills worsen and stops me from taking things seriously, because also, I have a theory. A game theory! I've wanted to share this with the public for a while, and I figured what better place is there to put it than at the end of this video. So let's dive right into why I think Apple isn't taking part in Season 4. Remember how I talked about Apple not doing anything Marshmallow didn't want to do or didn't approve of? Well, I think this is exactly what's preventing her from playing. Now, I know that may sound like a bit of a stretch because, when did Apple ever express interest in the revival of the game? There's no reason to believe that she would want to take part, even if Marshmallow didn't have an issue with it. But, there's also no reason to believe she wouldn't. Let's look at some of the other contestants taking part in Season 4. A lot of these returning contestants have very minimal development, and if they did have any development, it left a lot of room for them to develop further, with there being a lot of potential for further exploration of their characters. And if we're thinking as the characters themselves, they would want to make it further in the game for once, make new connections, and right some wrongs, maybe? A few of these contestants are also people that don't hold any strong negative opinions toward the game itself. I feel like Apple fits in with all of these things. She had a shortish arc in Season 2, which left a lot of interesting character aspects and paths the writer could go down to add even more depth to her. I think I made that kind of obvious. And she doesn't seem to hold any ill will towards the game. From a character and writing standpoint, there's no reason she shouldn't take part. On top of this, we see her helping out, or at least just hanging around, Go Big or Be Last when they're preparing their gift for Fan. Why would she be there if she didn't want to take part in some way? It makes sense why Blueberry is helping them out. He's got a connection with both Goo and Lifering, who were both really big on hyping him up on Indefinite Island, and Goo did seem to take a liking to Blueberry. And he is very physically gifted, which would be really helpful in testing out a training thing. But Apple? No one on Go Big or Be Last knows or really cares about her, and she isn't really known for being sporty. The only reason there could be for her to be over there and helping out would be if she had heard the team needed people to test Fan's training area and volunteered herself, which would show that there is a part of her that really wants to compete. But she can't compete, can she? And it's all thanks to the dependence. Again, Apple doesn't do things that Marshmallow wouldn't want to do or wouldn't approve of, and Marsh has made it pretty clear what she thinks of the revival of the game. What would she think of her if she chose to participate? And even if Marsh was okay with Apple doing something that went against her principles, she would never take part in it by herself. And we all know how Apple gets when Marsh isn't around. Plus, I think even with her permission, Apple would still feel guilty for taking part in the one thing Marsh hates the most. That fun. Every single aspect of Apple's personality is fighting against her and preventing her from being fully happy ever. Hooray for guilt, hooray for attachment issues, hooray for the inability to do things on your own, hooray for crippling anxiety. Hooray, 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 yay, yippee, woo! Awesome, just lovely. We love to see it. We love to see it. I don't know. This probably seems like a massive reach to you guys, but I think it makes sense. I mean, I can't say I wouldn't be surprised if this was canon, because, when am I ever right? And non-competitors never get any focus, but I don't think I'd find it to be out of place either. Would you?
Editing, Mihalina here. Oh my god, I mispronounced my own name. It's Mihalina, whatever. Oh my god. That was a bit of a mess. Sorry to all of the people who saw my, fucking posts earlier on and were expecting this to come out, a lot faster. The original script had a lot more segments, and I think that I got a little bit too ambitious there, to the point where it was intimidating, and my brain was just, not letting me write, even though it had 2 characters I'm extremely passionate about. If you want to hear me talk about, Silver Spoon or, a light bulb in the dependence context, I might, figure something out later, but it's yeah, whatever. And, after weeks of struggling, I decided, fuck it, I'll just condense it into the, 3 different segments, rewrite the ones that were already finished and finish the one that was already started, and it was so much easier. And also, I think the fact that I took twice my usual amount of medication might have helped. Don't do that, by the way. Don't do that. That's not good. Don't do that. I'm not a good example. And I'm not a really good analyst either. I really expected this to come out a little bit better. When I was writing the thing, I was convinced I was writing fire, like, oh, this got really dark, and oh, this was a really good observation, and oh, oops, I think it got a little bit too dark, but I think I was just kind of exaggerating it, because, like, you know, when recording and, like, reading over everything, it was like, okay, this is actually kind of small potatoes, and also a lot shorter than I thought it was gonna be, but hey, what can you do? I did the best I could. I don't know, I just wanted to share how passionate I am about this show and this, Apple especially, Apple, I just really wanted an excuse to talk about Apple, but I figured, well, just writing a video just about her wouldn't be, like, good enough, because she's not got enough screen time, you know, but yeah, I'm not as proud of this as I wish I was, but whatever, I'm just gonna put it out there, and I hope you liked it, you know? Yeah. If you didn't, then, oops.